All right. We've looked at lesson 8.1, and you have an idea of what organizing is about, but it's not enough. And we completed our lesson 8.1 by saying that there were tasks to be done in terms of getting an organization together. And that means knowing what you want to achieve comes from your master plan, knowing what work needs to be done in order to achieve that, and assigning authority to people, and then just making sure that it actually happens. Okay, so let's move on with our lesson over here with 8.2. And I'm going to move into the corner again, and we can advance the lesson. Let me share the screen with you. First things first, we are saying that there's a working relationship, and I have a working relationship with people to my left and my right, and a working relationship with people on top of me and people below me. In other words, I'm part of a vertical and a horizontal structure in the university. That means that I'm going to have to understand several things, and you recognize these things from Henry Fayol's principles, not so? That is work specialization. My specialization is in teaching. There's a chain of command and authority, and there is delegation and span of control, and the notion of centralization as opposed to decentralization, which impact on how my work is done and how I get my work done. So let's look at each of those in turn. We're talking about specialization, and you should recognize all of this because we've spoken about it once before. And that is the notion that we are better at what we do if we're allowed to specialize in what we do. With that in mind, we divide the labor up so that I do teaching work and research work, and other people will do administration work in the university setting, for example. We're segregating duties here and responsibilities. That means that I do mostly teaching and research, whereas other people will do mostly administration, because that's the only way we can make this process work. In a business organization that makes plastic bags, for example, there's going to be a machine operator that specializes in operating the machine, and there's going to be someone who works in marketing that specializes in selling those plastic bags, and there's going to be someone who works in human resource management who specializes in ensuring that people are kept safe in the workplace, ensures that people are adequately compensated, and have some kind of skill level which is continuously improved, and that they have some sort of career path that they can aspire to. In other words, employees within each department perform only the tasks related to their specialized function. Those specialized functions we understand as marketing, operations, people, and money. Now, when there's a lot of specialization, when it is extensive, then we specialize in one very simple thing, like that machine operator, for example, or like a TLB operator, and tractor loader, backhoe, the yellow metal that you see pushing material around on roads and what have you. So if you break things down in an assembly line, like making a bicycle and a bicycle assembly line, for example, then the jobs are going to be very small, but it means that you can get that small job done very, very well or efficiently because you're only doing one particular thing. But if you have to build all of the bicycle, it'll take you a long time. You'll understand this if you've ever serviced your own bicycle. So the chain of command means that we are introducing a line of authority. Someone is my boss, and I'm the boss of someone. And no one should have more than one boss. I must point out to you, though, that there is an exception to this, and it arises in an organizational structure, which is quite funky and modern or contemporary. We call it the matrix organization structure. So park the thought, we're going to be coming back to that. But unity of command means that If I'm going to be in charge of anybody, they will only report to me, and I'll be the only person who gives them instruction. They cannot have more than one boss at any point in time. So the exceptions to the rule only happen under special circumstances. But as I say, we'll come back to that. Authority, as we learned it when we contemplated fail, is something that relates to the authority we have to tell people what to do and how to do it. It is our decision-making power, if you like. We give orders and we allocate resources because we're the person in charge. That means three key things. It is an exercise in positional authority, whether you are at the top of the hierarchy that I draw on the screen for you with a pointer, or whether you're at the bottom of the hierarchy. Second, it is the case that authority must be accepted by subordinates. And that means that the legitimacy of the manager to issue orders must be something which is clear to subordinates. And thirdly, authority is something which flows from top to bottom in the vertical hierarchy. At the top, you have more positional power than you do at the bottom of the organization, at the bottom of the pyramid. I sketch on the screen with the red pointer for you. So there are three types of authority. Line authority is about the right that you have to direct the work of someone. We contrast that with staff authority, which means that you provide input, but you have no direct authority. And functional authority, which means that there is a level of responsibility allocated to a function, which is then able to exert authority over another function, telling the people in that function what to do. You might think that a little insane. You'd say, why would you put marketing in charge of any other function? And I have to say, I don't think marketing will be in charge of any function. But the answer is that where we're trying to achieve a specialization of skills, where we're trying to improve coordination, it sounds like it's a good idea. Now, you remember Frederick Taylor, who was a contemporary of Fail. Taylor said that you can separate planning from doing, because there are people who work out what to do and there are people who actually do it. And that is how it is possible to establish functional authority. Let's move on to delegation. Delegation means you can give your authority away, so to speak, or you can lend it. So if I'm going away for a period of time, if I have employees that report to me, I can delegate my positional authority, my entitlement to tell them what to do. I can give that to someone else. I can actually delegate my authority, hand it away temporarily to someone and say, while I'm away, will you please tell the people next to you what to do in my absence and on my authority? We recognize that if you give people some level of accountability, some of the managers accountability, in a context where the business runs well, where it works well, where people trust each other, then it becomes possible to delegate authority downwards and to say to people, would you please look after the functionality while I'm away? And they'll do it gladly, and they'll do it with the acceptance of the people that they are telling what to do. But in an organizational structure where there is a lack of trust for whatever reason, it doesn't really work well to think that you can delegate authority from a manager to a subordinate. Additionally, if you delegate, there's a positive spin-off. And that positive spin-off is the fact that people have something to aspire to. It's kind of like an informal part of their career progression. They're able to think about achieving something. So if you want to increase someone's job satisfaction, if they're ready for it and they're willing to do it, then giving them authority on the boss's behalf is not a bad idea. If you don't do that, if you don't give people any kind of authority, then the manager has to do all the work. They do all the telling, they do all the selling, they do all the commanding, they do all the directing. It just sounds, in theory at any rate, that it's probably a better idea to allow people to make decisions for themselves and to hold themselves accountable. But again, you can only do that in a context where there is a lot of trust between people. So these four things need to happen. If you're delegating, then you assign very specific tasks. You don't just say, will you do my job? You say, will you do this aspect of my job? And you give them the right amount of authority to be able to achieve that, because without authority, they can't, in fact, achieve anything. And you make sure that everyone else in the team accepts responsibility, and you create accountability by saying, if you don't do what is required of you and what you agree to do, then you have to be held accountable for that lapse in your judgment. It's more difficult than you can begin to think of. And before you actually arrive in the workplace, as I intend that all of you do in the next 3 years, possibly 4 years, I think you should read the benefits chapter, because it acts as a useful proxy. It doesn't replace actually working and finding out for yourself, but benefits writes particularly well about this. Now, when we introduce span of control, you should remember that there's a limited number of people that you can place under the control of one supervisor. So how much is just right? Is it 4 people? Is it 5 people? Is it 10 people? Or is it 20? What is the optimal width, if you like, of the span of control? What we're attempting to do is ensure that we don't have too many people reporting in and taking instruction from one person only, because if they do, that one person is going to be overloaded, and they're going to be making snap judgments in haste, and sometimes anxiety and panic, and that's not good for the organization or the people they're telling what to do. In different organizations, in different contexts, with different levels of competition and rivalry, the optimal span of control is going to differ. It's going to depend upon the circumstance in which the organization and the people find themselves. Sometimes 4 is not enough, and sometimes 4 is too many. And we must also talk about centralization and decentralization. We understand what that is. The contrast between centralized and decentralized organizations is that in a decentralized organization, we're trying to spread the power. In a centralized organization, we're trying to retain the power in the hands of only a few people in senior management. Now, who you give authority to depends on a few things. Firstly, how unpredictable the environment is, and how risky the decision is for the business that anyone is going to be taking at any point in time. The more repercussions there are for a bad decision, then I think the smaller should be the span of control, and the greater should be the centralization. However, if decisions taken by people are not going to have severe negative impact, then I think it is feasible to introduce a greater level of decentralization by devolving authority to individuals who may or may not mess up. But if they do, remember, it's not going to affect the organization because the choice we made was decentralization only happens where if people mess up, it won't cause a massive problem. And finally, when you're putting people in charge, they need to be able to make decisions. Anyone who can't make a decision is not really a manager. So low down in the organization, you're not delegating authority where people can't actually leverage that authority to get jobs done. A centralized organization then is one where the person at the top of the organization retains all the power, it's concentrated there. Whereas in a decentralized organization, we try to spread the power and the decision making around. So that decision is something which I've said is is not within the reach of some people, but where it is within the reach of a lower level manager, then it becomes possible to devolve authority to that person and to create career opportunity for them, career progression opportunity for them. But in all of this, based upon what the organization has done, what the organization has achieved, how the organization has chosen to devolve authority and decision making, that tradition of management is going to impact upon what is likely to take place in the future. An organization that has concentrated power at the top means that it's likely to continue in that vein, whereas an organization that's been more liberal in the devolution of authority is likely to continue in that more liberal vein of ensuring that people are more enriched and enabled by being able to do things. Now, I think we can summarize this by simply saying that if we're organizing, then it's a process, and the process is about the orderly use of resources achieved by assigning and coordinating tasks. And the process is one which deploys people in a very particular way in something we call the organizational structure. It must be carefully considered and deliberated. Nothing slapdash or hasty. It happens in a process. What work needs to be done to accomplish the goal? Who's going to be doing that? And who's going to be the boss of all of it? The concepts that underpin that are work specialization, chain of command, authority, delegation, span of control, and centralization versus decentralization. When we move on to the lessons labeled 9.1 and 9.2, we're going to say, how do you actually put this into practice? And that's when it starts to become fun, because now we're talking real organization. I'll see you in lesson 9.